Hello, it's Kath Berry here, and we're here to talk about burnout, adrenal fatigue, and kidney deficiency in an interview with Dr. Daniel Keown. Dr. Daniel Keown developed an interest in Chinese medicine in his teens from his grandmother's exploits in China. After finishing his degree in medicine, he worked for over a decade as an emergency doctor before returning back to college to complete a degree in Chinese medicine. Realising that aspects of Chinese medicine remained poorly understood from a biomedical standpoint, he travelled to China to study under the masterful tutelage of Dr. Wang Juyi. It was this study that provided the impetus to write the book The Spark and the Machine. He lives in Tunbridge Wells in England with his wife and 2 children, and in his free time he grows vegetables on his allotment and dreams about the perfect wave. It's with great pleasure I introduce to you Dr. Daniel Keown.
I mean, within Western medicine, the concept of adrenal fatigue doesn't really hit the mainstream of Western medicine. Doesn't, if you started talking about that with doctors, some of them might go, oh, yeah, but most of them within the kind of hive mind of Western medicine will go, there's no such thing.
Right,
I mean, clearly there is. It's kidney. Why is that, do you say? Because they're all effectively kind of scientific fundamentalists, a lot of doctors, so there's no studies on it, and therefore it doesn't exist. That's a lot of thinking behind a lot of scientists actually, and doctors as well. But I mean, yeah, it's kidney deficiency, isn't it? Kidney yang. And so the adrenal is basically mainly what they're talking about with the kidney of Chinese medicine. So the hormones within the adrenal, you've got 2 parts of the adrenal gland. You've got the cortex, which is the outside, and that produces cortisol, which is why it's called cortisol, which is also known as hydrocortisone. I think the Americans have a different name for it. I'm just trying to think though. No, I think it's cortisone they call it. So that's like kidney yin, because what that does, if you give people hydrocortisone long term, then they start swelling up and they become bloated and they hold on to water and they hold on to salt. Effectively, what cortisol does normally is it takes stuff out of your body to use for an emergency. So if you have a crisis, then the adrenal cortex will release a load of cortisol, and that will then go to your bones and leach out the minerals from your bones so that you can rebuild bones elsewhere. It will go to your muscles and leach out the minerals from that. It will hold on to water, because most of the time if you have some kind of crisis you're going to be bleeding, so you're going to need to hold on to water, and it will hold on to salts. So that's the kind of kidney yin. So if you imagine if you're constantly living in a crisis of a psychological type, which many people are, worrying about bills, worrying about job, getting up earlier than they really should do, but not really getting out in the sunshine enough, and not getting down the allotment, and instead going on these carriages and trains, especially around here. So your kidney yin is always being pumped out. You're always under stress, and the cortisol is always being pumped out. And so the way I see it is that part of your body just becomes exhausted because it's constantly working, and it should be resting at times. So that's the kidney yin. And then the cortex of the adrenal gland, and also of course the kidney itself as well, is kidney yin too. The way in which the kidney works, holding on to the correct amount of water, then that clearly is going to be like water's yin and kidney. So, and then the yang aspect of the kidney is even more interesting, because that pertains to a part of the adrenal gland called the adrenal medulla. So the medulla is the center of the adrenal gland, and these are the cells. So that effectively the adrenal medulla is almost like a brain. It's got pretty much the same cells as you'll find in your brain, and they're producing like absolute bucket loads of adrenaline, and also dopamine and noradrenaline. So these are the hormones of kidney yang. So these are the The adrenaline is clearly flight or fight. And then dopamine is something that actually is linked to willpower problems. So cocaine addicts, they reckon that they don't have enough dopamine in their brains, but equally what cocaine does is it releases dopamine as well. And so dopamine's like a reward hormone or neurotransmitter. And so that's the Chinese concept of the kidneys dominate fear, adrenaline, and the kidneys dominate the kidneys are the origin of willpower, which is the dopamine. So again, if you're constantly in a stressful situation, then your adrenal medulla is going to be constantly also producing these hormones, and it's not going to be resting, because the thing about the kidney is what Chinese medicine teaches us is that it should rest at nighttime, it should recharge. And what we find in our society is that our society is now like 24/7, isn't it? I mean, doctors are the worst for this. I always said that when I was working, and that we should have protected sleep. We should be setting the example for the rest of society, not just saying, oh, we don't understand what's going on. So if you do a night shift, you should have effectively some kind of protected sleep between about 3 and 5 to enable your kidneys to recharge, to give them a rest. And if you do that constantly, then you're going to burn out your kidneys. And by burning out, I suppose it's just like, you've constantly got the flame of the kidneys. If the kidneys are like a flame, and that's the terminology that's often used within, the Chinese texts, they talk about the fire of Ming Men. And if they're like a flame, then it's like the flame's constantly on. And so, yeah, burnout is quite a good description of what happens. Eventually, the gas canister runs out, and you go onto this kind of erratic flame. And yeah, the solution is more sleep and rest and sunshine.
Okay, so going back to your experience as an accident and emergency doctor, what did you see, in that high intensity hospital environment? Could you describe for us? You mentioned that doctors themselves are high candidates for burnout. What sort of things were going on?
Wow, people don't really understand how bad it is in the NHS anyway within emergency. It actually scares me. I genuinely say this. It scares me that I'd ever have to use emergency, and the only way I'd ever use Western medicine is really as an emergency, because the rest of the time you should be using Chinese medicine. And but I mean, interestingly, I was just talking to someone today. I just bumped into him on the way back from the allotment, and he was an emergency doctor as well, and he was saying that it was quite terrifying what he said. In fact, he said, if you come in with a cold or flu, you'll be fine. But if you come in like dying, you're going to die. And the problem is that this emergency service we have now in the UK is swamped, absolutely swamped. And what you do as a doctor most of the time is you are sifting through hundreds of patients to find the patient who is actually a genuine emergency, who needs your treatment now. And the problem with like medicine, Western medicine, is like you have to be you 99% of the time you can just look at somebody and say, actually they're fine. Like you could almost just say, go home now. Yeah, but every now and again someone's going to slip through, and so you've got to be able to justify why you sent someone home medically legally. And you need to document all of this, and the whole thing starts to become very stressful, because the lawyers, whenever a mistake happens, it's normally very easy to look back and understand why that patient was missed. And obviously what the lawyers and you can't use the defense of, I was enormously stressed out because I had enormous numbers of patients and I hadn't had a break in 8 hours. You can't use that as a defense, even though that's what happens. And so that causes enormous stress within doctors themselves, and they don't understand because Western medicine is basically disease care, it's not. There's no philosophy of health. There's no idea of how to promote health. It's all about disease care. Then they don't understand how to look after themselves, and they don't understand how to look after their emotions as well. So they're a very sick population, doctors. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of research looking at burnout as a phenomenon across all health professionals. And it's interesting that you say that, because there seems to be recognition among doctors that it exists as a concept. And I guess what we need to, on this webinar, is start to clarify is the two different definitions of burnout being perhaps the psycho-emotional breakdown within a workplace, and then what we're talking about from a Chinese medicine, Jing deficiency, Jing burnout. To you, what's the difference between the two? Do you, I'd love to hear your perspective around those two concepts.
Yeah. I think burnout. So that kind of burnout. So a professional burnout that occurs is basically like a Shen burnout. That's how I see it. Now, the kidney and the heart are obviously linked through Shaoyin. They're basically, Wang Juyi describes them as two poles of a magnet. So that in fact, he says the magnet's spinning as well. I don't quite understand the full thing, but I like that dynamism of kidney and heart. There's such a dynamic pairing, those two. The hormones that move between them constantly, the whole time, and your kidneys. The first thing that starts to really go if your heart starts to fail is your kidneys. It's the first organ. They're so sensitive to each other, and so I think a lot of like professional burnout is occurring at the Shen level within like the medical system anyway, where people like medicine is literally dispiriting. It has no spirit. In one of if I was to get you, can I get you a copy of? Can I just show you something?
Yeah.
So, like this is the tome of emergency medicine called Tintinali. It's pretty dangerous, actually. If you drop this on your foot, it's really going to hurt you.
You end up in emergency.
Yeah, you will, yeah. And so anyway, this is basically every single aspect of emergency medicine is in this. And so you would think that, given that the reason that anyone, apart from someone who's unconscious, goes to emergency is ultimately a problem with their spirit, isn't it? It's a problem with, like, their spirit is concerned about something going on. And if you look there, I don't know if you can see at the bottom.
Spirits.
There's nothing.
No
there's
spirits. Yeah.
There's spiromycin and there's spironolactone. There's no mention of spirit at all, and there's no mention of emotions either in this. And so you've got an entire paradigm of medicine where basically there's no spirit in it whatsoever, and so naturally it's very dispiriting to work in that system. And that's what's happening with doctors. They're having to engage with people's spirit more and more, because in the past it was the doctor was more patriarchal and it could just say, here you go. But now they need to be able to explain what's going on. They need to be able to engage with the spirit, but there's no framework for doing that. And so they become enormously stressed by this, because if someone is coming to you constantly with, what the Chinese would consider needy issues, which is a spleen deficiency, then, within Chinese medicine, you've got a framework for dealing with that. I understand, And also you can use the acupuncture to try and help bring things back to balance. But within Western medicine, there's nothing. There's nothing. They're just, in fact, you must have heard of the phrase heart sink, obviously. So heart sink is Ranald MacDonald, who's the one of the best acupuncturists I've ever met, who works down in Bideford, and he gives a great story about how 20 years ago he was talking to a bunch of GPs trying to drum up practice, and they turned around to him and said, so what do you do about your heart sink patients? And Ranald said, blimey, he felt quite worried about this, because he's just like, I've never heard of this condition before. It's like, wow, patient's heart sink into their abdomen. This sounds terrifying, and started to say to the GPs, well, I'm sorry, I've not heard about this. This sounds really awful, though. What happens to the patient? Do they die? And they're like, no, 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 it's not the patient, it's you that gets the heart sinking. And he's like, and he just found it so amazing or astounding that like you had a medicine where the patient made you ill. And that is one of the core problems at the heart of Western medicine. It's dispirited. And that's why there's so many people who are like burnt out from a Shen perspective. And then add to that the fact that they're also burnt out from a kidney perspective as well, from a willpower. And you've just got this phenomenal rates of burnout. I mean, it's in crisis in this country. It's a complete crisis. It's gonna collapse this summer, I think, the NHS.
And interestingly too, one of the things I've been now exploring is that the rates of burnout among acupuncturists is starting to rise. Ooh. So whether it's starting to rise or whether people are starting to have a framework for understanding more about that, but it's not isolated to doctors alone. Doctors, dentists, psychologists, psychotherapists, and now acupuncturists are all starting to recognise that when you're involved in patient care, and generally, in talking to other professionals, the issue is patient care when it meets your own real life circumstances, and whether that be whatever you're going through in your personal life, it's how that then interacts with your professional persona or your professional being.
Damn, I couldn't hear that last minute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm rapping on. So it's really just looking at burnout among acupuncturists as well. Have you come across that?
Oh yeah, I got that. Yeah. After that, you.
The issue is that I'm really wanting to help acupuncturists actually better understand what burnout is, both from that psychological perspective as well as from a TCM perspective. And I think what's really important in that is understanding that it's not exclusive to doctors. Acupuncturists themselves can be part of it.
I'm surprised it's it suggests. I mean, I'm surprised it's so high amongst acupuncturists, but it may be that, like, I mean, I always develop a barrier between like myself and the patient that you try not to cross when you're dealing with the patient, and that barrier has to be a little bit flexible though, because sometimes you need to give a little bit more and sometimes you need to give a little bit less. And it's an interesting question how you kind of set up that barrier. I mean, because the difference, like, I find it much more difficult in private practice compared to NHS, because in NHS practice, you basically just say, look, this is what we can give you, take it or leave it. And it's quite nice, actually. I really quite like that style of practice, because it's like, I'm going to give you everything I can, but then when you go into private practice, the temptation obviously is to give more, and especially when you're starting out, then that you want to get them back again, you want to get them better, and so I think maybe that's one reason why people are emotionally burning out a bit, is they're trying to give too much. But also financially, it's very hard work, isn't it, to have a private acupuncture practice, especially in the UK, where you've got your competition is effectively for free, and they're always busy making inroads into any time that something's proven to work within the kind of Western medicine, acupuncture within Western medicine framework, then the NHS will start using it for that, which means it's very difficult to build up a business model where the moment you prove something works is the moment that you equally then get massively undercut. It's quite a tricky situation. So I think it is really hard at the moment to kind of work within that system, and that is going to affect your kidneys and also your shen as well, your heart.
Before we go on to talk about the kidneys, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you set those boundaries. And obviously you've had all those years as working as an A&E doctor, but what's your advice for acupuncturists around strategies to create really clear and set boundaries?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I suppose most of the time patients just naturally are aware of the boundaries anyway. So So I suppose I'm pretty flexible about them in that most of the time, like 90% of patients would just know naturally where they lie, and will pick up on cues and such like when they're stepping over those. So for instance, timing with, so if a patient's running over time, then 90% of patients will also be aware of that, and we go, oh well, sorry to make you late, kind of thing. So I suppose that's the first thing, is you only need to, when you very rarely actually need to get involved in maintaining boundaries. And then I suppose I just listen to my own internal, like, kind of voice, and just pay attention to it, and then just work it from there, really. It's not something, it's interesting, it's not something I've ever kind of because the thing about where I worked in the NHS was that those, like I said, those boundaries were a bit different in that you just went, look, this is what I've got to offer. And then since I've been in private practice, I've sometimes had to pull myself back from giving more. So one thing that I had to pull myself back from was discounting. So I used to discount, and then I just learned that actually discounting is, I don't think it drums up any more business, and I don't think it is particularly healthy for either party either, unless there's a genuine difficulty in paying. But these are like very difficult to work out who's genuinely difficult to pay, because you don't know what their financial situation is. So that's one boundary I still struggle with now as well, is like the financial transaction. Like I said, within the NHS, you didn't have to, that never occurred. You never had to like get people to pay, so it was easier.
Indeed. And it's been really interesting while we've been talking. The sun seems to have come out for us. You've got this glow. It's like you've got like a halo-like glow, as if this webinar is being blessed from above. It's just an interesting observation to see how we won't worry about changing so much as just acknowledging that you've got some really crazy light features going on there.
Yeah, that is quite crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's, and again, to our audience today, we're going to celebrate the fact the sun is shining in the United Kingdom, because it's quite rare. So I'm not going to ask Dan to close his blinds, because I'm sure he can do with all the vitamin D he can get. In fact, it is something you just mentioned. In your talking about burnout prevention, one of the key things that you listed was making sure people go out and get some sunshine. Could you talk us through, given that the sun's shining for you now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a book out there called The Miraculous Effects of High Dose Vitamin D, blah, 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 blah. And basically, vitamin D is another kidney hormone, vitamin D, because vitamin D is, first, it's a misnomer. It's not really a vitamin, it's a hormone. And it's got a really complex pathway, vitamin D. And what it is it's an anabolic hormone. So in other words, it enables your body to build itself up and become stronger. And it's an amazing trick of nature. What happens is, like, pre the time when we understood how to store and package food so that we wouldn't starve over winter, like during wintertime there'd be less food, and so the body would naturally have to go into hibernation, and anything that needed to be repaired would have to just wait until spring or summer. And so the body's trick for working out when spring and summer was vitamin D. So as soon as the sun starts coming out and the plants start producing like food, then the vitamin D was the messenger within the body to say, great, now let's grow and let's repair things and let's make things better. So most people now spend their entire times indoors in some way. You get up, you have breakfast, you stay indoors, you get in a car or train indoors, you go to an office indoors, come back on a train indoors, and you barely see the sun. And this is something that 150 years ago you'd be out in the fields from dusk to dawn. In fact, this house here, I live in a little house in Tunbridge Wells, and it's they back in 1880. Now it's a family of four who live here. There was 20 people living in this house, and you can imagine that you would have got up in the morning, woken up probably by somebody doing God knows what, and you'd be out of the house straight away. You couldn't hang around in a house with 20 people in it. It would have smelt bad and all kinds of things. So you'd be out in the sunshine, you'd be getting sunshine, and this is something that that we no longer get now, and our bodies, I think, are really suffering. And again, it's a kidney related thing. I think it affects because the kidneys, vitamin D ends up in the kidneys, and that's the final place where it's transformed. So I mean, that's why, like, my son actually was very vitamin D deficient. It took us a couple of years to work this out, but literally within an hour of giving him vitamin D, and we ended up having to go on nice holidays. What a shame, to sunny places in winter. But within an hour of giving him vitamin D, he would suddenly start eating. And he wasn't eating at all. It was heartbreaking. He was very, very small and weak, and he just wouldn't eat. You'd put food in front of him and he wouldn't eat. And he was born at the end of this terrible summer in England where the sun didn't shine at all. It was back in 2010. It was the massive floods in England. And then 2011, there were also big floods. The sun really didn't shine either. And so he was just so vitamin D deficient. And it took years, actually. And now he's a lot stronger and he seems fine, but it took years for that vitamin D to kind of build up within his system. But I think, yeah, we really kind of, as a society, we're almost vitamin D deficient. We need to get out more.
And it's been interesting. I've just this week been spending a lot of time researching for our cannabis module, looking at sleep hygiene strategies, and that they do refer a lot to natural daylight. So what's been your experience around sleep and daylight?
Sleep and daylight, in what context? Cannabis?
Very similarly, that the idea that without exposure to natural daylight, that we seem to be, by being exposed to artificial light or electric light, particularly LEDs from mobile phones and other devices, it's causing massive disruptions to melatonin and therefore sleep disorders.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the artificial electricity, again, it's a very modern invention, isn't it? It's basically only 100 years old, electricity, and in fact there was I agree. I think melatonin is probably possibly like the master hormone of this system of the whole body, and it's like a metronome kind of thing. I don't know, this is just my own personal theory. And the interesting thing about sleep and light is that if you look at rates of breast cancer, for instance, in the developing world, where there's no electricity, it's about a fifth of what it is in this country or the Western world, even when you take into account higher rates of detection. But then if you look amongst blind people, then it's the same as in the developing world. Now I've said this, I'm thinking, is that really true? but I heard this and then I researched it, and I'm 95% sure this is true. So basically, like, the lights are screwing up our internal hormonal balance, because breast cancer effectively is, I mean, the Chinese see it slightly different, but there is like a hormone problem. Or certainly we know for sure that hormones can turn breast tissue cancerous. So it does suggest that light is affecting our internal hormonal balance and creating cancer. I think, all of these things, like the artificiality of our world, what we personally I try and get back into, like growing my own food and being outdoors most of the time, and using a bike to get around and all those kind of things, just because I think they're like the basics of health, like before you even and health is the basics of living. So before you can even start doing other things in life, you've got to have your health. So those are the most, I've spent the last couple of years just really focusing quite a lot on getting an allotment where I can put very little effort into it, but get a lot of food out of it, because you can't trust where the food comes from anymore either. It's we're living in quite a crazy era.
Indeed. And it's so interesting. We've now sort of moved into 3 different areas, looking at burnout, which is the use of energy, then sleep and sleep problems, and which is obviously when you're meant to recharge your batteries. So there's this double-edged thing going on where people are expending too much energy, they're not recharging, and then the final part, the fuel, which is what you're talking about, the food coming in, the food and water, the substance is dubious at best. But I'd sort of love to hear more about, you mentioned just a moment ago that melatonin being the metronome of the whole system. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, years ago I got really interested in like melatonin, because melatonin is produced by the pineal gland, and the pineal gland is obviously the many people think it's the third eye, and there's a book called DMT, the spirit molecule. So the guy who wrote it was a guy called I think his name was Strassman, and he was a psychiatrist, and he managed to get permission to start injecting people with DMT. Now, DMT is the most active constituent of something called ayahuasca, which is that super hardcore, like herbal juice from the Amazonian rainforest that basically sends people into different dimensions as far as anyone could tell. Yeah. And he did these like experiments, and the conclusion he comes to at the end of his book is that actually what we're experiencing now in this reality is basically a frequency broadcast. And this guy's like a psychiatrist, proper, so he's not some crazy man, if you like. So he said that basically our bodies are tuned into this frequency, like radio normal. But actually, when you take DMT, it affects the tuning in the pineal gland, and you start tuning into other like dimensional realities. Because when he gave this under controlled conditions, he was saying everyone is coming back with very, very similar stories, and they don't know each other. And also within these worlds that they're going into, he says that everything is internally consistent. So in a dream, if you drop, things can fly, and elephants can appear out of nowhere. But he said because what he'd do is he'd give the DMT, and then the moment they came back to consciousness, he'd be like, right, what happened, and write it all down. And he said that that everything was internally consistent with it. So in other words, these appear to be real worlds that people are visiting. So the pineal gland, the ancients talk about it as or the third eye, as some kind of ability to see worlds or the spirit dimensions, or even our own dimension at a deeper level. And melatonin is produced by the pineal gland, and so I kind of got interested for that reason, and I couldn't actually go any further than that. It wasn't, but I just got the sense from the little research that I did. This was 15 years ago, that it was almost like the master hormone of the whole system. Yeah, and because it's day night, it's like a kind of metronome, just drum, 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 and everything else starts beating to its rhythm.
Is there a TCM equivalent?
Well, it would be well, where is it? So it's kind of kidney heart type stuff again, isn't it? I think the brain is like very kidney heart. So interestingly, the brain itself is 90% of what the brain is made out of isn't neurons. It's the supporting cells that support the neurons, and they're all created by neural crest cells. And neural crest cells are the same things that make your adrenal cortex, and what basically Jing. Everything within what Chinese call Jing is made by neural crest cells. So the little ears, the little bones in your ear, your teeth, the conduction system of your heart. And so And so the brain itself is kind of very much kidney, but also the blood supply is like the heart and the shen, and the pineal would be like that same kind of thing, a mixture between kidney and heart, because it's kind of sitting in the brain. It actually sits within the cerebrospinal fluid. So inside your brain, inside your nervous system, there's these canals of water. Yeah, so your brain actually floats in this. Your brain's floating in this kind of canal, and the pineal gland almost kind of sits within this floating canal system. And I don't know, it starts to get quite crazy. I almost think that basically this canal system picks up vibrations. This water picks up vibrations, and the pineal gland, picks them up as well and resonates and produces hormones as a result.
It also sounds, from a TCM perspective, that the pineal gland is your connection to heaven. We often talk about heaven, earth, and humanity, and that idea that from all that esoteric work you were describing with DMT would perhaps link that to the heavenly ancestral beings and something, the more esoteric side of Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Coming back to the more functional side, and what you mentioned with you've spoken now twice about the neural cells of the brain being identical to that of the kidney. What's your view then when in the context of talking about burnout and this idea of sucking from both the the cortex and the medulla of the kidney? Could you just describe to us more from a TCM perspective what we're seeing when we see burnout or adrenal fatigue or complete Jing evacuation?
Yeah, I mean the kidneys are the fount of our bodily health, aren't they? They're the and the thing about the kidneys is they're really hormone rich. There's so many hormones in the kidneys. You've got adrenaline, dopamine, noradrenaline, cortisol, something called aldosterone, erythropoietin, vitamin D is basically from there as well, and there's probably a few more, but I can't. And renin as well, and so the hormones are kind of and testosterone and estrogen, they also come effectively from the kidneys, and the hormones are kind of like the spice of our life. I see them as they're the thing that give our cells vigor and strength. So the kidneys just packed with all these hormones, and so from a TCM perspective, then it's really quite simple. It's just exactly as they say. I mean, if you don't give your kidneys have a certain amount of energy and strength and ability to produce these, and if you burn that flame too brightly for too long, then you just start to wear out the kidneys, the ability to produce that, and so you just need to regenerate it again, which is difficult because this is like a Jing related thing. So yeah, I think, because I've heard adrenal fatigue is quite a kind of buzzword at the moment within the world of kind of alternative medicine, if you like. And to me, it's just quite simply, I mean, what's been called kidney deficiency and Jing deficiency for millennia by the Chinese. It's the same thing. I think it's very simple to understand. It's maybe I'm not quite understanding it correctly.
No, it's interesting. You're absolutely right. But I also think that's why patients are flooding to acupuncturists, because there's a high correlation between understanding adrenal fatigue, understanding what lower back pain feels like, and then, of course, that an acupuncturist understands that within a kidney deficiency framework. So, I think what we're seeing is, in a way, it's very much complementary to the acupuncture movement to, embrace the concept of adrenal fatigue and say, even though I know we started this webinar with you saying that Western doctors don't even acknowledge that it exists as a syndrome, we are within our society is starting to recognise that people can say, I've got adrenal fatigue, and that there's a medicine in that. People understand. I understand a little bit like 10 years ago, chronic fatigue was sort of a bit of miscellaneous, and then ME was another one. But now it becomes part of the popular vernacular to understand. And that's why I'm so fascinated about this area, because I think, firstly, it's something that acupuncturists can offer so much for their patients. But I want to take it one step further and also say that we as acupuncturists need to be really careful, about our own jing and about our own kidney energy and just around, while we just I guess that's why I'm shoehorning two concepts into this webinar, which is obviously looking at professional burnout, but then also what happens when you see this in your patients. So, I'm really keen to hear more about your
personally, I think the way I see it is professional burnout. It's so what I kind of almost reverse this situation. So what world would you want to live in? What's the world you'd want to live in? And then just start creating that world you want to live in. So rather than try and change because a lot of the time, like you think, oh well, I'll carry on doing this job until I get to this point, and then I can do this and that. And actually, what's happening is you're carrying on along the wrong path. Still, one day you're going to die, and then it's all going to be game over anyway. So if you want to, the thing at the moment, there's enormous change going on in the world, and every single acupuncturist out there in the world is basically part of the solution. But the temptation is always to, like, in my own personal opinion, to try and fit into the world and then wait for the world to change. Yeah, so in other words, slightly like kind of sell your soul. So it's difficult because it's not. I understand it's not as simple. People have got mortgages and bills and stuff like that. But I'm very Taoist in my kind of attitude towards life, and so I just think that it's all about simplicity. It's all about creating simplicity in the world, and so that's why, for me, it's like getting those simple things right within your own life first. I mean, growing food, I just think, is the most like nourishing thing you can do, and it's such a powerful thing to do as well, to grow your own food, because you are no longer dependent upon this state apparatus to enable you to survive, which, if you think about it, is like the ultimate kind of kidney. The kidney kind of, after breathing and water, it's food, isn't it? And so if you're subconsciously, if you haven't got a good supply of food, then your kidneys are going to be stressed. So within the professional sphere, I think that, like, there's great change coming. Definitely, one way or another, there's enormous change coming in the world. It's got to happen. And it's happening now, actually. So, like, to me, it's like, well, as humanity, we have to grab the bull by both horns and basically wrestle it to the ground and change our own lives and be a beacon for how we should live. And then when that change occurs, hopefully there will be enough kind of yin shoots, that can then spread, because what we're living in at the moment is an incredibly yang period of history. And what happens to excess yang? Yin emerges. But this yin can't emerge. Yin won't emerge like in a massive scale. So you're not going to suddenly have like these mega corporations turning around and going, oh, actually we should really look after the planet, because they'll only say that because they want to sell you stuff. And so the yin shoots that will appear are going to be on an individual basis. And to do that, I think there's a certain degree of self-sacrifice that every acupuncturist... Basically, what I'm saying is that I don't have any easy solutions for this thing. But I think that by reframing by reframing it into, like, instead of like, how do I survive, is into what world do I want to live in, and creating that world.
Indeed. And what you've hit on, that idea that everything is yang, and just thinking about connectivity, iPhones, you're always available, you're always awake. There's a real sense of, at what point do we have to then take control and actually enforce our own yin into a world that is totally yang, it's totally stimulated, and then it's, that again fits with this model of that your kidneys are constantly having to work harder than what they ever should, or that they were ever built to do. and then, as you say, with the Jing Qi, whatever you were born with, or your Yuan Qi, and just sort of, just thinking, I'd love to come back. It's a bit of a revelation for me that your mention of the kidneys being such a powerhouse of different hormones. Do you have a favourite of all the ones you listed? You sort of listed a shopping list of different hormones. Which would be your top three that you think in terms of when you're seeing patients are the ones you think of?
Oh, I love that. Well, I tend to frame everything in Chinese medicine. In fact, towards the end of my time in emergency, I even started talking to doctors and actually saying, this patient's, got, too much damp. And actually, I just thought those were actually more precise terms than saying that patient's edematous, for instance, he's got a phlegm or whatever. I just found them more precise, strangely. However, so I don't tend to think too much when I see patients in terms of the hormones, because I think they're too complex for that. They interrelate. However, I do like hormones, and I would say adrenaline is number one. That's just, adrenaline is, it's a great hormone. Also, in emergency, I loved it. It's an amazing drug, adrenaline. It's if I had to have one drug in emergency, it would be adrenaline.
Okay,
because,
tell me more.
Well, you can save. So adrenaline is just basically just kidney yang. In fact, you can. It's an interesting drug. It works so fast. If you give it into someone's, I had a patient once. I described this story in my book and he'd been treated in America for anaphylaxis and wasn't quite sure whether or not he'd been overtreated, because that's what they tend to do in the States. They just overtreat you because they can bill you for it at the end. So I was like, I'm not entirely convinced you've had anaphylaxis, and he wasn't either. So we just said we'll wait and see what happened. And then about half an hour later, this is the thing about anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis is where your immune system is hypersensitive to an innocuous protein. It is a true cock-up of most health problems aren't cock-ups within your body, but I think this is a true cock-up of your body, because it's just taken this innocuous protein and completely overreacts to it to such an extent that it can kill you. There's no way any protein apart from a true poison in your body could be that dangerous. And so this patient suddenly just started to deteriorate really quickly, within minutes. And he was like, I'm starting to feel really unwell. And his face was bright purple. And I was like, oh, shit. Back at the beginning, I was talking about how, when you're a doctor and you're seeing these patients, you're trying to work out the sick from the non-sick. And basically, when there's a cock-up, it's very easy to look back at the notes and go, oh, well, you should have done that, shouldn't you? So that's what I'm thinking. Oh, shit. I've sat on this patient for half an hour. It's going to be very easy for a lawyer to think, but more importantly, I was thinking, I don't want this guy to die. So I drew up some adrenaline, and this is a technique that not even many emergency doctors know. So normally you give adrenaline IM, but the problem is with anaphylaxis is their blood pressure drops. Now, what your body does when your blood pressure starts dropping is it protects the vital organs, the yin organs. So it's not bothered about muscle or bone so much, or even skin, but it will protect your kidneys and to a certain extent your liver and your heart and your brain. So if you give the adrenaline into the muscle, there's no perfusion through that muscle. So the adrenaline just stays there, and then you give another dose and another dose and another dose, and it still doesn't fix the problem. So you want to give it IV in this situation when things are getting bad. And the dose you give is ridiculous. It's 5. We started off with 5 micrograms. So 5 micrograms of adrenaline. And then I gave that another 5 micrograms. Within about a minute, he just turned from being this really sick patient, bright purple face, basically saying, I think I'm dying, which he kind of was, to being completely fine. And it's incredible drug. And you can give it. Che Guevara, he traveled around to Cuba with adrenaline in his backpack the whole time because it also treats asthma. So the salbutamol inhaler the blue inhaler that all the asthmatics have, that's basically a modified form of adrenaline in there. So what they've done is they've taken adrenaline, they've made it more specific for the lungs, like what's called a beta-2 agonist. You can also give it for so you can give it for anaphylaxis, for asthma. You can give it for slow heart rates. You can give it for to stop bleeding. So someone comes in and they're gushing blood out of somewhere, you just pour neat adrenaline on it, it stops the bleeding. Yeah, it's just an incredible drug. And that's from the kidneys. That's the kidneys. It's kidney yang. Yeah. And then the other favourite one is something that's from snake venom. So there's a very complicated loop that's involved in maintaining your blood pressure that goes from kidneys to lung to heart and then back to kidneys. It's called the renin-angiotensin loop. And what they worked out was that I think it's cobra venom works by interrupting this loop. And it causes, because of the interruption, it causes like you to have shock and die. And so they created drugs from this, and the drugs are called losartan and candesartan and ramipril, and they're amazing drugs. They're amazing. Like if you have high blood pressure, and it's one of the few drugs that I'm like, oh yeah, stay on that. That's an amazing drug. It's basically like taking tiny doses of snake venom the whole time. You know, incredible stuff. And that's a kidney hormone that is interrupting. So this is a pathological condition between heart and kidneys, like kidney fire. So this is kidney fire, like affecting the heart, and vice versa. And so the snake venom drug, losartan or candesartan, ramipril, it stops that kidney fire from blazing upwards and damaging the heart.
So where does dopamine fit on your hierarchy of kidney hormones that you favour?
Oh yeah, so dope. There's no real like drugs for it though.
No, actually, I'm actually thinking from a TCM perspective in terms of the understanding the complexity of the kidneys.
Yeah.
And in hearing you describe the multifaceted ways in which the kidneys affect the endocrine system, it's really fascinating to hear that makes sense why adrenal fatigue, it's not really adrenaline that's running out, it's actually, as you say, it's the whole kidney. And so trying to get and for our audience today, trying to get a greater sense of what that fatigue looks like, and then moving on to treatment approaches around how you might manage that.
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole kidney. So you've got like all these multiple hormones, and dopamine. So when you look at how adrenaline is produced, it's actually produced on from a precursor, which I think what is it? It's I think it might be tryptophan. It's something that's found in like a certain type of food. I forget exactly. But basically, to produce adrenaline, you go through dopamine. You produce dopamine first, then noradrenaline, then adrenaline. So all adrenaline that's produced by the kidneys, they first produce dopamine first. And actually, that dopamine, it can just shuttle it off and release dopamine instead. So it's almost like you've got willpower, dopamine, and then from willpower is produced fear, or desire, flight or fight, or do you see what I mean? So without the willpower, without the dopamine, you're not going to get that fight or flight, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're just completely passive and practically catatonic, you're not going to suddenly, and you've got no willpower, then even if the tiger comes in, you're just going to be like, just finish it, So so all of these hormones produced by the kidneys, they're all it's not just going to be one hormone that's affected when the kidneys get burnt out. So in other words, the dopamine, which is the willpower one, and adrenaline, they're the same hormone. They've just the body just tacks another little group onto the dopamine molecule, and then suddenly it's adrenaline. So if your adrenaline is low, your dopamine in your kidneys, adrenals, is going to be low as well. You see, the system, the pathway is just deficient or exhausted. And yeah, and likewise, this is yin and yang balance. So if the adrenal, when the adrenal medulla starts producing, then the adrenal cortex will start balancing. So if one is exhausted, the other one's going to be exhausted. The whole system's going to be exhausted, and then that's going to feed into the heart, and your Shen's going to become exhausted. So it's just because there's so many hormones in the kidneys. It's where the body concentrates energy and organization and stuff.
So moving on from that then, what's your treatment approach? How do you look at this when you're in clinical practice?
It's very common, isn't it? I mean, I had someone...
Let's talk about symptomology. What would you see? How is this presenting?
Yeah, so you get... I trained with the 5 elements type of thing, so I find that's quite... I find the 5 elements very useful in instant impressions kind of thing before you've even started, and you get the dark eyes around the eyes, the dark circles, and you can get the groaning voice, and you can get the just a general lethargy, and then you get all the Jing related things as well, so graying of hair, and poor teeth, and then sometimes they might have some heart problems as well, because that's basically the core of your Shen, and then low back pain and all those kind of things all make me think this person's got kidney or adrenal fatigue, if you like, or kidney deficiency. It's very tempting to call it adrenal fatigue sometimes, because it's almost like people believe in that more than they do the Chinese. And then so the treatment principles are, I think I often wonder about how much new energy you can generate in a person with needles, and how much of what you do with the needles is just redistributing the energy that's there. And then I would always use moxa on people who I thought were kidney deficient, and probably moxa on the back shoe points, kidney bladder 23, and maybe bladder 52 as well, and maybe the Ren points as well, like Ren 4 and Ren 6, and then kidney 3, just to kind of give the kidneys an extra boost. But I'm very much like Wang Ju Yi kind of school of medicine, so it's all channel palpation and what you feel in the channels, and that kind of guides treatment. But then the main thing will be to say, look, and this is where it can be a bit challenging, is to say, this is where you are in your life, and and ask them what they want to achieve in life and what their goals are, and try and kind of unwind, because this is much deeper than them, what's going on with people who are exhausted in this way. This is a societal problem. This is the way society is set up, and I was watching something about the Taoism the other day, and they were just saying the moment you start getting educated is the moment you start moving away from the Tao. Do you want me to carry on talking?
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
Oh, well, because so Taoism is just a very simple life, isn't it? It's just moving the way the universe. But what education does is it starts telling you how to think in certain situations, but Taoism says that you should never have a way in which you should always think. Education. So people think, right, okay, I'm going to go through school, I'm going to get qualifications, I'm going to get a good job, and then I'm going to start going to work every morning at 6 a.m. on a crowded commuter train, and coming back at 8 o'clock on a crowded commuter train, and barely ever seeing my kids. No one ever really kind of thinks, yeah, that's my life plan, do they? It's not really much of a life plan, but they just kind of fall into that pattern. of doing it. And the question is, why have they fallen into that pattern? And it's because the society and education and stuff has been structured to guide them that way. So they've actually just moved away from the Tao because they've like been educated to move away from the Tao. So it's unwinding that education, you know, and telling people that actually you don't have to live this way. It's quite a tricky thing to, and that's why I say that, like, as acupuncturists, I think we should just be living the way that, you know, that society should be set up, rather than you know, as the first step to changing, you know, because we can change individuals and that's good, but like to change society is a much more powerful thing, because a lot of our ailments are like societal, aren't they? A lot of our disease, I mean, obesity, that's a societal issue. It's not I'm pretty sure that obesity is because the food that people are eating is so nutritionally poor that they feel like they need to eat more and more of it. And so they just generate more and more phlegm.
It's interesting though too that, you know, the positive way to look at that is if the disease is societal, then so is the treatment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's and that's the real challenge, isn't it? Is to try and get people to like see that, you know, I had a patient recently and it was crazy. I mean, she came with adrenal fatigue, you know, kidney deficiency. It was clear as day. She was 25, young, and she was working 18, 20 hours a day. You know, and you try and unpick, why are you doing this to yourself? Yeah, but I couldn't quite unpick it. And she only came once, I think. Oh no, she came twice, and then the third time she was working. So she paid for the treatment, yeah, and apologized, and I never saw her again. And it was like, I kind of did say to her, look, I mean, you can't fix not getting enough sleep with acupuncture. You can fix not being able to sleep, perhaps, but you can't fix someone who won't lie down when they need to lie down. Yeah, I mean, given enough treatments, you probably could, but you can't magically say 4 hours sleep is now worth 8 hours sleep. That's what I'm saying. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. You know, why was she in a position where she felt like she needed to do that? You know, what did she want to get out of life that this was giving to her? And always comes back to parents, I think, doesn't it?
And that worldview, and also, you know, that idea, as you say, as someone sort of lost their way with the Tao, then all sorts of unhealthy attitudes, unhealthy behaviours can sort of sneak in. But so Dan Keown, in summarising today, you know, the focus of today's webinar has been about burnout and looking at the kidney's role in burnout. What are your key messages for acupuncturists out there, either facing burnout themselves or treating patients, as you say, they're in this fast-paced, high-dynamic, highly demanding, very stimulated life? You know, what's your Dan Keown take-home message?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing is that, like, this is something that we need to change on a societal level. On a patient-based level, it's, you know, the thing I would look at is unpicking why they feel they need to like live like that, which is going to be quite tricky. A kind of emotional spirit level for them, and then at a physical level, I'd be looking at like nourishing their kidneys, and maybe often, you know, you find that their liver is there's problems in the liver as well. I find it because they're not going to be happy about this. They're going to be angry about their situation, but for whatever reason, they still feel like they need to keep driving themselves forward. But there's almost certainly going to be, and wood and water are always linked, aren't they, in terms of nourishing each other. So I think Wang Zhiyi likes liver 3 and kidney 3 for that. So that's the way I would see it, you know. And on a professional basis, with burnout. I think we have to understand that we're living in a pretty weird time in history, and that if it's a struggle, then that's actually just because it is a struggle. There is an enormous struggle, I feel, going on at the moment between, if you like, good and evil, or the forces of darkness and the forces of light. And that one way in which to approach it is to start getting back to simple life, and looking at the living a bit more simply and in harmony with, like, the Tao. That's one way in which I've approached it, and I found it, really useful.
Indeed. And just in summary, do you have any sort of top favourite acupuncture points that you'd use for this?
For which? For the
kidney fatigue.
Yeah, so I would use those points I mentioned before. Yeah, so kidney, I'd always use moxa, because someone once told me, and this makes the most sense about moxa I've ever heard, you use needles to disperse and moxa to nourish. So I've spent 10 years trying to work out when to use moxa, and it was actually Suzanne Robidoux, I think her name is Suzanne Robidoux. She does a lot of stuff on CCM, or classical Chinese medicine, and I said, because she'd studied with the greats in Taiwan, and I said to her, when do you use, what's the rationale for moxa versus needles? And she was just like, straight away, needles to disperse, moxa to nourish. So you've got someone with kidney deficiency. Like, the way I see needles is, needles are taking a bit of energy out of the body. I kind of see it like that. Just a teeny weeny bit. What you're doing, what you're working it on the basis, though, is that you're redirecting the energy in such an efficient way that the net effect is more energy in the system. But I almost see like the needle itself is just taking a teeny weeny bit of chi out of the system. Apart from obviously your interaction with the patient, but then that feeds into, you need to be. And then moxa, I see personally as like adding lots of energy into the system. So, taking nothing out but adding lots in. So I would use moxa on the back shu points, on bladder 23 and bladder. If there was more spirit problem in terms of how this person is relating to like their fatigue, their adrenal burnout, their kidney deficiency, if it was a question of they can't see the way forward, they can't understand where this problem is, then I'd use more the outer back shu points. And then almost always like kidney 3 as well, just because it's the source point, isn't it? So it's kind of a given that you want to use that. And then I'd always channel palpate as well and try and find out. But until you get to the root source of why they're doing this to themselves, which is going to be quite tough, because it's really something like that's they're just a part of society, and the question isn't why are they doing it to themselves, it's why society doing it to itself.
And I guess the most important thing is, what can they do to change what's realistic and doable to get the most results and the most change? Because as you say, the societal change is going to take a long time, so what can they be doing as being part of that process? So sometimes I recommend, I say to people, like, I honestly think growing food is like one of the most important things, and they'll say, I've got no space, and I'll say, just buy some herbs and water them, and because it just reconnects you to the land, to the thing, and also looking after like plants. At some level it's got to start making you like look after yourself a bit better. Do you know what's interesting, Dan, is I went through a period of time a number of years ago of actually researching interviewing some of the great acupuncturists that we know, and all of them are keen gardeners. So
really?
I came very close. I came very close to writing an article about the link between acupuncture and gardening, and it never came out. But I've got Peter Dedman and all these wonderful people talking
Yeah.
about their relationship with the soil. So it's a wonderful note to end
Yeah.
on. I love that if at the very least the take home message from this webinar is to go and buy some herbs, put them on the windowsill, whether this is for you or recommendations for your patients, and take that first step in connecting with the earth. So thank you, Dan Keown, and really appreciate your amazing perspective on burnout and the kidneys.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me on.